Okay, good. Well, the hardest part of this presentation for me is going to be introducing Morgan. So I had to have notes for this.
Oh, Lord.
So Morgan's got
Don't believe any of it.
an extensive background, which she did her bachelor's work at Utah State in animal science and ag communication. Then she went to New Mexico State for her master's degree, and then to North Dakota State for her range science PhD. And she funded her education and supported herself by being a firefighter with the U.S. Forest Service during that time. And she shared with me that towards the end of her studies, an opening came in the Texas Extension Service for an associate professor and as a range specialist, which was kind of her dream job. It's what she wanted to do and what she's been doing since then. And that kind of brought her to it's kind of what brought us together, because she works with PBAs. She leads the burn school and research in native grass response and prescribed burning, and in brush encroachment, which we've talked about a lot. She's on the board of directors for the Great Plains Fire Exchange, and also co-chair of the Texas Burn Board, which is an important thing in Texas in particular.
Yeah, well, thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
We are tag teaming this today, so I appreciate you putting up with us. But Mike comes to us from the Lampasas Burn It Prescribed Burn Association. He has been in the Lampasas area for 10 years?
No, not that long, 2015.
2015, okay. It feels though that,
Yeah,
because
I know,
he's
yeah.
plugged into our PVA so well then. Mike was trained as an electrical engineer, and he worked in that field for many years, mostly with Texas Instruments.
Mm-hmm.
But then he also did a lot of travel. So he was in India, Germany, and probably a lot of other places too. But he comes to us with a very unique background. Both he and his wife are Texas Master Naturalists. Would you put that title on you as
Well,
too?
Janie is, yeah, I'm not there yet.
Okay. We're slowly recruiting him. But very active within the Prescribed Burn Association, but then also very active within just general fire culture. So he came to this meeting on behalf of the Prairie Project, which is also a huge sponsor with the Great Plains Fire Science Exchange. And if I could have brought his entire burn association, I would have done that too. But Mike is our representative, and we're really excited to share with you today on some of the stuff that we've worked together with.
So we want to talk about really kind of two things today. One of them is we want to talk about this communications kit that we've developed, but also we want to talk about kind of this, how we got there, the path we got to, and particularly for this audience, because it was a collaboration between the Extension Service, between academia, and a landowner who showed up and wanted to help. So we're going to talk about how we got there, the background, talk about the research that led to this, talk about the kit itself, and then a little bit about next steps. So here's my little slice of heaven, and I want you to study this because it's going to be a test at the end of that. So this is in the heart of Texas, in Lampasas County. And so you can see what we've been talking about all along, woody encroachment in this land. This used to be prairie land. There's some oak in here. But actually, what you can't see in this picture from 2016, which is about when we got this land, is this is actually re-encroachment. So some of what we've been talking about in this land, I've got a picture from 1970 when this had been cleared. And so this is all regrowth that we're looking at here. And we're working on moving forward with that. We purchased this land in 2015. It was part of a larger operating ranch. It was historically overgrazed, had some absentee landowners, you all know the story. It's overgrown with ash juniper, which we call cedar, and mesquite. There was some erosion of it, and we have unreliable surface water. So my wife and I, we got into it and thought about what do we want to do. We said our goal was to rest, clear, and restore to a sustained grassland, approaching native, knowing that we can't get to total native. And that was partly informed by her becoming a master naturalist and being exposed to Aldo Leopold and being exposed to the Bamberger Ranch in Texas, which we can go on and on about as an example of how to do this. So we developed a management plan by technical support from a lot of people, AgriLife, NRCS, and Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. And we've started mechanical clearing of the juniper and the mesquite and chemical plant treatment of the mesquite and the prickly pear. But we kind of came to a point about, okay, what's next? Where do we go with this, right? So we've got a lot of slash. I've got a lot of slash right now with the drought that we've had. What do we do with it? And then the other thing is, how do we keep it from coming back? So we're at this point in our journey with these questions ahead of us and trying to figure out what to do. So go ahead. So we learned and made prescribed burning part of our plan. We surfed it, read, we joined the Burn Association, and the big help was the Class 4 certification in Texas, which Morgan runs, and that's where we met. And then went through and figured out insurance and all of that. But we came, so that was kind of getting our heads around the whole thing and saying, yes, this is going to be part of not only clearing the slash that we've done, but also the maintenance that we've been talking about in the last couple of days about continuing to do it. But the next thing is we thought about doing this is, we can't burn in a vacuum. What would our neighbors think, right? We're newbies in the area. Who regulates it, and do they support or control, what's going on? What do they think about it? What do the local fire departments and the volunteers think? And so we had a whole lot of questions about how do we move forward with this and how do we do it safely, of course, but also, in a sort of the social interaction that we talked about, that Carol talked about a little while ago, is how do we do this in the context of our neighborhood? So we needed to ask and then maybe influence what was going on. So that's where I was when.
Yes. This is kind of the Cinderella story of how we met. So Mike mentioned that he wanted to learn more. He mentioned he'd heard a little bit about what prescribed fire can do. But I would say, there was really very little information available for him. He probably learned a lot from Texas Master Naturalists, but a lot of that information was outdated. And so when he found that the burn school that is offered pretty much every year in Texas was available, he jumped on it. And this burn school opportunity was very unique because I brought in the A team. If you are familiar with Dr. Charles Butch Taylor or Mr. Ray Pennant, those guys are kind of the founding fathers of prescribed fire in Texas. In fact, Butch started one of the very first prescribed burn associations in Sonora, Texas, called the Edwards Plateau Prescribed Burn Association. He went and learned about it from John Weir in Oklahoma and brought it back to Texas. So Dr. Taylor, Butch as we call him, was very instrumental in these burn schools. And so when I conducted this burn school in 2019, I brought all those guys back into it. And it was a really cool opportunity because you got to hear a little bit about the newer technologies that are available, but you also got to hear Dr. Taylor's original take on it. And so if I could have handpicked a burn school for Mike to attend, this would have been it. And so it was really cool the way it all came together. And especially what Mike brought to the table, he was hungry for information. He wanted to learn. He not only wanted to learn, but he wanted to learn how to apply it and how to grow and cultivate that fire culture in his local area. So this prescribed burn school was started in 2019. It was a 3-day course. They sat through several PowerPoints. It was probably death by PowerPoint in a form of fashion. But then we went out to the field. We burned, I think it was like a 15-acre trap or something like that. Texas back then was kind of coming out of a dry period, so a lot of folks were worried about wildfires, so we picked a pretty conservative burn unit. But Mike carried a torch. Mike completed the field day. And then as part of the burn school curriculum, all participants are required to take a 100-question exam and pass it with a 70% passing rate. And so Mike did all of that during this 3-day burn school and burn course. Now, fast forward to 2020, July 27, 2020, we were delivering a workshop. It was a 4-hour workshop where this project was part of the Joint Fire Sciences Program project. I was a PI on it, but it was led primarily by Dr. Urs Kreider. And this Joint Fire Science Program workshop was funded through the same funding agency that funds all of our Great Plains Fire Science Exchange and the Exchange Network. So at the end of July, we were offering this Fighting Fire with Fire workshop, and believe it or not, Mike heard about the Fighting Fire with Fire workshop. And of course, this is right after he completed the burn school. So not only were we able to get him into this fire practitioner communication loop that we had built from our burn school, but he was still hungry for more information and wanting to learn and even go above and beyond what the burn school, original burn school, had taught. So this Joint Fire Science Program grant, Fighting Fire with Fire, I want to share a little bit of the key results with you because it was very influential in this development of the prescribed burn communications kit. And this is what not only kept Mike's interest, but also helped grow, foster, and cultivate that growing interest to where he can take what he learned and back to his local community and his burn association, and again, spread the good word and the gospel of what he not only learned from the burn school, but also what he learned from the development of this research project. So the big fancy title is called Fighting Wildfire with Prescribed Burning in the Southern Great Plains, Social and Regulatory Barriers and Facilitators. Again, all of this funding was secured through the Joint Fire Science Program and was led by Dr. Urs Kreider. Now, what we learned with this grant was all connected to surveys, okay? So we conducted telephone interviews with 66 key informants. We wanted to cherry pick those guys who were very fire friendly, fire savvy, but we also wanted to cherry pick the folks that were afraid of fire, that had kind of on the fence about fire. Maybe they had some previous wildfire experiences, maybe they dealt with a spot or escape. What we wanted to get a broad view perspective of what folks' pulse was on fire in general. We also conducted 4 mail-out surveys to reach 192 court judges. In Texas, there are 254 counties, so we didn't really reach every single county judge in Texas, but we did get a pretty healthy number of them. We also sent out the same survey to 400 county commissioners, 406 Natural Resource Conservation Service personnel throughout the entire Southern Great Plains, so Oklahoma and Texas. And we also sent it out to about 1,200 private landowners. You'll notice those response rates are really, really low. Now, that was kind of a limitation to what this data is, and when you look at it in terms of an academic lens, yeah, we would have expected to see those numbers a little bit higher, but I also think that response rate is very telling in itself as well. Now, what we learned from doing all of this survey work through the NRCS, through key informants relative to prescribed fire, through the mail-out surveys to county judges and commissioners, is we learned that emotion or effective heuristics often lead to emotional tags associated with either positive or negative memories are a factor, if not the driving force, in decision-making regarding prescribed fire use. It didn't matter if you were a county commissioner, a county judge, an NRCS employee, or if you were just a general landowner who burned 25% of their property every year. You linked prescribed fire with some type of emotion when you conducted this survey and filled out this survey. And so what we gathered from this overarching grant is that we needed to build more positive prescribed fire experience into the outreach, into the programs, and into the information that we were building so we could improve that overall perception and use of prescribed fire by diverse stakeholders. Notice when I said emotions, I didn't say positive emotions. We had a lot of negative emotion tied to just, hey, what do you feel about prescribed fire? Would you ever implement a prescribed fire? Now, some more take-homes from this grant, from this research, is that most county commissioners reported being comfortable with prescribed fire, but they appear to align their fire prevention attitudes with emergency management personnel, and they seemed inclined to preemptively enact burn bans and reluctant to approve exemptions to that burn ban, even if it was for agricultural purposes. okay? Many county commissioners depended on input from those emergency personnel. So, for example, their local fire chief, their local fire marshal, emergency management coordinator, you know, whoever's decision it was to enact that burn ban, that's who those county judges and county commissioners relied on. So again, these findings suggested that we needed to do more outreach and communication on a very local, almost intimate level in order to change that emotion that was connected to prescribed fire. We needed to get them out to that actual burn. We needed to get their boots on the ground. And we needed to see if we could moderate their attitudes about escaped fire risk and spots, leading to hopefully fewer burn bans and more exemptions to the agricultural burning. So another kind of cool take home from this work that really built and factored into the overall communications kit that we have built is that we developed and identified certain barrier relationships. So for example, the overall prescribed fire experience was identified as a negative barrier if you were located in a certain state. So for example, Oklahoma, much more inclined to prescribe fire, much more open to it, much more of a positive experience. Texas, not so much. Wildfire experience and land ownership for livestock or crop production also proved to be a barrier limitation. However, we were able to identify opportunities and potential for changing that emotion associated with prescribed fire to a more positive experience. Identifying fire decision-making processes and gender was highlighted to be a significant variable in how we can change that emotion. The other part of that process relationship that showed potential were fire decision-making processes and property ownership for non-consumptive or recreational use. Meaning these are the guys that aren't in it for crop production, aren't in it for agricultural production, aren't in it for livestock production. These are the guys that are probably hunting it. Okay. So let's go into more of that county judge and county commissioner data, because in Texas, that either makes you or breaks you. If you have a receptive county commissioner court and local officials, then you probably get the green light to burn on more days than not. And most importantly, you can circumvent the 90-day burn ban that is typically in place. So this survey data showed that most of the county judges, their self-reported familiarity was grouped overall by state. So Texas is in the light gray, Oklahoma is in the black on the far right. Most county judges reported not to be at all familiar with prescribed fire. Okay, and remember, we only got 192 of those counties. About 35% said that they were somewhat familiar, and 15% said never heard of it, don't know a single thing, can't distinguish between prescribed fire and wildfire. Now, between the states, you can see that Oklahoma, a moderate amount of the county judges were somewhat familiar with prescribed fire. Okay, a few were very familiar with it, and then only 10% not familiar with it. Okay, moving on to those county commissioners. Again, county commissioners and county judges work together to either grow and develop a fire culture or to enact blanket burn bans is typically what we called it. So county commissioners, the only statistically significant variables that popped up in their overall comfort with prescribed fire was, number one, their familiarity with fire. Okay, so if they had had a positive prescribed fire experience, or let's say a negative wildfire experience. The second one was whether or not that county commissioner was also a rural land owner. If they live out in the country, if they manage brush, if they're somewhat familiar with maintaining open acres, open rangelands, then they had a significant comfort level with prescribed fire. And again, county commissioners followed that same pattern, grouped by state as to their overall comfort with prescribed fire. So Texas, probably moderately familiar with it, but Oklahoma had a much higher experience or more comfort with prescribed fire than Texas did. Okay, so what we learned from that is that we, did I skip a slide? I can't remember. I feel like I skipped one. No. Okay. So when we concluded this data, this survey data is really cool and it's fascinating. I had no idea that gender would play a role in someone's overall comfort or familiarity with prescribed fire. But what does that mean for our prescribed burn associations? And more importantly, what does that mean for the Watson family and for people like him? How do we help him do more prescribed fire, get more fire on the ground, and build that fire culture in his local community?
Yeah, so, I talked about where I was in my personal journey on this, and I show up at this seminar, and wow, here are the answers. So this is the result, and I'm going to talk now more about what actually came out of that to help. If I can move the slide. There we go. Oop. Sorry. Yeah, we're missing something. Yeah, we're missing the slide. Well, about the content of the kit, but I can talk to it.
Yeah.
So there I was, saying, okay, what do I do and all that? I go to this seminar, and here's the research that says, here's what the attitudes are of the officials that you're going to be talking to. And so some of the participants of the seminar came back to the organizers and said, this data is great, but how can we use this? What Morgan was alluding to, how can we apply this? And so we kind of scratched our heads and thought about it, and I went out and Googled some and looked, and there's some stuff in the far west about burning forests, but there wasn't a whole lot about grassland burning and about how do you do this. So I got a great response from Morgan and also from Carol Baldwin and Lori Bamerlin, and we kind of came together and just formed a little team, and we put together this communications kit and to try to address these issues. And a lot of what's in there is stuff that you all will be familiar with. But the idea was to have a kit that a PBA could take and begin to use to advocate for fire in their local community, in their neighborhood. So there were several parts of that. First thing was, who are the stakeholders? Who should you be talking with? And so we went through that. How do you find out who's your county judge? Who are your county commissioners? How do you find your local VFDs? And the fire chief, those are the people you want to talk to. And even as far as, because we have some state level issues too, who are your state legislators? Who's your representative? And then we talked about, in the kit, kind of what are the best ways to talk to people. One of the things that came out of the research was not only the attitudes, but also how do people respond? How do people like to communicate? Guess what? Number one is face-to-face, right? So that's part of what we recommended, is find these people and go meet with them. And then the kit describes some best practices for how to meet with them. So for your officials, it's, find them, talk to them, set an appointment, go meet them face-to-face, bring a couple of people from your PBA, meet with the county commissioners, and find out. And a lot of the best practices are listen first and understand where they are, some of what Morgan was pointing out, and then respond to that and help them with additional information. Well, what additional information do you bring to them to address their concerns? Well, that's also in the kit. There's some key talking points, that's stuff you all are probably familiar with, about the benefits of prescribed burning, what it is, why it's safe, and so on. So that's also in the kit. And then another thing that we really emphasized, and it was about neighbors as key stakeholders, right? Which, you would think is obvious, but it's hard, right? The last thing you want to do is surprise your neighbor with a fire. And I guess stepping back a little bit with your neighbors and also with the fire departments and your county commissioners, this is a process. This is not a once and done deal, kind of like prescribed burning. It's not once and done. And so your elected officials change, your neighbors change, and so it's an ongoing process. And it needs to be started early. It needs to be started before you burn. I wanted to know what my county commissioners thought and what was the procedure for establishing a burn ban and who did I need to communicate with. I wanted to know that, well before I actually did a burn. We went out and met our neighbors, and talked with them about it and let them know that we were doing it. We let them know in the season that we were planning to do a burn. And then, as we were talking about in the last session, we had them on the email list, so step by step, they knew our preparation getting up to that, so that nobody was surprised with that going on. So neighbors are an important stakeholder. They're in the kit. There's an example letter that you can use to write to your neighbors and tell them what's going on. And then the last piece of the kit was, most of that was about communicating with your environment about what you want to do. The last piece of the kit that's really important is feeding back into the science behind that. And so one of the things we really encourage people in the kit, PBAs, is to report their burns, report every burn. Because we saw yesterday John Weir's talk with his statistics about the safety of burns and all that. And we need to be feeding back into that so that he gets a broader base of statistics and current statistics that we can then use as the talking points when we go to advocate for prescribed burning. So that was less about talking to your stakeholders, it's about talking to your association and getting your members to report the burns and be sure that that's getting back so that it feeds the process and it can keep on going. So we put that into practice with our start. I can speak to you about what my county commissioners think about it. I can tell you what our burn ban process is. I can tell you who my neighbors are and what they think about prescribed burning. We invited all of them to our burns. A lot of our neighbors came and saw what it was like. And that speaks again to the research, is that that's one of the key influencers on people's attitudes, is actually seeing what it's about instead of just imagining. So all that's in the kit. We have copies here and we have some additional material you may want to look at. So that's where we are today.
Yes. So we have the kit available for you. We are looking to take this kit and elevate it to a more meaningful level for the entire Great Plains. So again, this is work that started with the Great Plains Fire Science Exchange. Carissa Wonka, who is a USDA ARS field scientist, she's also on the kit. She's also an attorney as well, so she sees it through a little bit better light. And then, of course, our partners in Carol Baldwin and Lori Bamerlin that are located within the exchange. But this kit is not done. Like I said, we've created a Texas kit, but every state is unique and different, and every county commissioner court or county judge is going to be different as well. So our hope is that we can take this kit and we can build upon it for maybe each unique prescribed burn association, but we need feedback and we need to be able to apply this kit, gain the feedback, learn from it, and then change it to adapt it and amend it and make it better. We want it to be a very organic, fluid document that's constantly getting revised in order to meet the local needs on the ground. But we also need to be able to make sure that that kit's tailor-fitted for whoever is implementing it. So a really fire-friendly local community probably doesn't need all of the background information on what fire can do. Maybe they need more hands-on stuff of letters to write to absentee landowners, or this is how you communicate it to the media, and this is a sample Facebook post that you might use when you are communicating that your local PBA is going to be burning. Most importantly, though, we got to scale it up. So we got to get other states involved, and we have to get it hopefully applicable to the entire Great Plains.
Okay, so now for the test. So here's that same piece of land now in 2021, and that is not a smoke plume, that's a cloud that's in the aerial photograph. But if you remember all that growth that we had, this is the result of us applying this and going forward with our burning. You can see some of our brush piles burned down here. We did area burns on these two. So we're moving forward with this plan and based on some of the stuff that's in the kit.
Yeah. And so we can go ahead and turn the lights on now. Bill can also pass out a kit. The other briefs that are out there on the table are the other briefs that were written up as part of the original Joint Fire Science Program Research Grant. So that summarizes the county commissioner data, the county judge data, as well as the emotion heuristics data that we found from the landowner responses and from the other surveys that were conducted. But y'all, this is kind of a really sweet story of Mike attending a burn school, Mike attending a workshop, Mike implementing it, and then Mike giving back to the system telling us what we need to do better, what information we can deliver for his local community so that he can be more successful in getting more fire on the ground. All right, Mr. Smith.
So, do you ever close the loop and invite people back to see the finished product, a couple years after the burn, see the results, and then kind of report on impacts, like the logic model on that you changed, those things, so that you can, those county commissioners or judges can say, oh, they did shift their species composition, they did get more bird production, this is impactful, you've changed not just knowledge, but also behaviors.
I'll take a first shot at that. My hope is yes. I know that Mike's and mine's relationship is rooted in and ingrained for a while. Mike's not going anywhere, I'm not going anywhere. So we're going to continue to work together. Absolutely, I want to take field days and have workshops out on this place and measure that impact. The problem is the turnover rate with our county judges and commissioners, right? They come and go almost as quickly as our county agents. And so they're not always real familiar with the process or the relationship that Mike has set up. And that was also a reason why we built this kit, so we can go to that new county judge or new county commissioner and say, hey, this is what we've been doing and this is why we've been doing it.
Yeah, I think, and so back to the point about growing this kit, it's not, that point is not specifically in there, and that's a great addition that we need to put in.
Yep.
But,
just because of extension.
yeah, but
we're already going to be doing it.
But in my own experience, what I'll say is I have been careful to bring my neighbors in to see it. And I learned a new reason for doing that in this seminar is because they've got seed banks that I want to get rid of, right? And so I want to encourage them to be using the process too. So that's good. We haven't, in my experience, and realize we've been really applying this just for, well, with COVID interruption, really only about a year. We haven't been able to get our elected officials on the ground to see a burn yet. But that's a great point, and we should do that afterwards to bring them back. What we have done is we did drone photos before, during, and then 3 months later. We happened after my burn, we happened to have a good rain, so it was lush afterwards. And so we've got good pictures that we've shared with people about the benefits, and that's another way to do it.
Platform to get forage production estimate then later on. If that works, then you can document that.
Ideally, yes. I think that's where I want to take every single demonstration ranch or PDA to showcase. Here's a free tool online that you can build that data set yourself to show your local county officials the impact that you've done. And then, once DRAC releases that county production loss data too, that's going to be even more empowering.
We're talking things.
Good point.
Other questions?
Could you use that also to show the fire hazard that you've eliminated?
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, that's probably as key as anything. It's not that you've just got more grass, but you just protected half your neighbors because you took.
Because we've got a fire break, yeah.
Yeah.
And in fact, what Morgan mentioned about the turnover in officials, we actually in our county had a positive thing because we had a less supportive fire chief lead and a more supportive fire chief came in, and he's all over the issue of wildfire suppression, using prescribed burning instead of wildfire. And if we hadn't had this dialogue and gone through the ongoing process, new fire chief, we need to go meet them, we need to find out where their heads are at, then we wouldn't know that. So yeah, that's part of our talking.
One thing that really gets overlooked in our area is consistently is pole power at a lot of pole utilities and water utilities. And you guys had that experience, or been able to reach out to them, or you had much interaction?
We really haven't done a whole lot with them. Of course, it's part of the training that we get. It is about being careful of the utilities that are out there. On my land, there's not, we've got a couple of power lines, but we basically take care of them ourselves. There's no major transmission lines or pipelines. There are a lot of them in our area, but not on our property. And that's another good point, is to notify, as a stakeholder, to notify them what's going on.
In Texas, we're pretty fortunate. I mean, surface owner rights are pretty important, yeah. So I know lots of landowners who are burning through wind turbines or transmission lines or across just poly line. And they do have a notification system in place. It's always hard the first fire. They throw a fit, those folks throw a fit, they don't like it, they don't want to, drop what they're doing in their day and come out and babysit their whatever infrastructure is. But the second, the third, the fourth fire, it gets much easier and much more palatable for them to swallow. And then also to understand that, our prescribed fire practitioners are not reckless. They're going to do every standard of care to take care of whatever needs to be burned out ahead of time or prepped ahead of time. So I think, in that kit, it's important that our local officials or anyone that's got infrastructure in that burn unit understands that we're not just going out there and flicking matches. We've got a plan, we've got prep that we need to do, this is our contingency if anything happens, and this is how we're mitigating all of that and also communicating all of that. Guys, don't worry about it, we've got this under control, we've done this, this, and this to mitigate that. So, yeah.
All right, want to help if you work with. I have a ranch in the Los Canyons down here, and Dawson Public Power covers most of that area. And Dawson goes along and sprays the seed trees underneath the power line and kills them.
But, that's also a huge point of that local community and local structure that we just need to tap into. If it's not developed, how do we fix it? How do we grow it? How do we cultivate it? How do we make it a fire-friendly place where they're not going to pitch a fit every time a landowner wants to burn? They understand it's what we do, not something we're trying to make more work for. Yeah. So it basically, and there are more fire briefs over here on the table can identify it. But it basically showcased that is a potential avenue to pursue. So females were found from the survey data to be much more open and much more willing to burn initially as their first fire. So when I say females, think of the lady that gets a ranch out of a divorce. Think of the lady that gets a ranch because her dad just recently passed away, or granddaddy left it to her, or whatever. Or think of the lady that was an absentee landowner and, in her 20s, 30s, 40s, but now that she's 50s or 60s, she moves out to the ranch. She wants to be more hands-on and more applied and involved with the day-to-day operations. Believe it or not, that is a growing demographic in Texas. In the Hill Country area, for sure, we have programs that are devoted to women only, believe it or not, because they didn't come from an agricultural background, but they want to be involved now on the ranch. And so, but they're coming to the table without that background and without that foundational knowledge. And so they're much more open to burn it rather than to spray it or to grub it or to blade it. And I think that's a huge potential and probably untapped opportunity that we have in saying, hey, this is how prescribed fire works, this is how it can work in your operation, in your grazing plan, in your wildfire mitigation plan, and this is how you can get your first burn done. I think that's an easy plug for PDAs that are oftentimes overlooked. Women are growing in land ownership demographics tremendously. Any other questions? Mighty fine. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.